Hey everyone, welcome to the How to Compost event. I'm pretty excited to see you guys. I know some people were a little late and I was trying to send the documents, and I know if you didn't get here in time, you're not able to see the documents. So if you're not seeing two PDF files that like tell you items that you can compost and items that you can compost, just let me know and I'll resend them at the end of the event. But I'm excited to see you guys. How is everyone doing? I just want to start off by asking how you guys are doing. I know it's almost the start of the semester and that's a little bit stressful, but I just wanted to have this event to kind of relax and get to talk about composting. Hey, Kitri and Annalise. um, okay, so I guess I don't see anyone else scraggling in. It's 3:02 and I will kick this event off. Also, I'm using a new mic, so if you can't hear me, just let me know and I'll re-edit some things for the microphone. Okay, let me share my screen. I created a presentation for you guys. Let's kick it off. Oh, and also if you guys have any questions at any times or comments, feel free to just chime in and use your microphone. I can't really see chat, so it would just be better to use your microphone. Okay, so the reason I created this event along with my team is that the SGA approached me and was like, hey, do you want to teach people how to compost? I know a lot of people in the SGA really want to learn how to compost. And I think there's a need for like an education on how to compost, because I know before I joined the composting team, I didn't know anything about composting. So I thought this was a great opportunity to share with you guys. So here's some questions that I want to answer through this event. I'm going to answer them. I just wanted to show you guys specifically what is compost or composting. What are the benefits to composting? Basically, why you should compost at all times if you can. How can you compost yourself? How can you collect your own food scraps to compost? What things can you not or can you compost? And how can you get involved with the compost team if you want to get further involved in like sustainability practices and composting as a community, which I think is pretty important. So to start us off, what is compost and composting? Composting is basically the process that gives you compost, and compost is a mixture of soil and organic material. And when you mix these two together, microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, animals like worms, and other living things that live in soil help break down food scraps and anything else that is deemed organic. And these components break down the organic material into stuff that fertilizes the soil, to stuff that makes the soil hold more water and just makes it a better quality soil overall. So it can make dry and barren soil basically amazing fertilizer for cheap. You don't have to use any chemicals. So that's what compost is. It's basically hacking your way through making fertilizer, which I think is pretty cool. But basically this big chunk of compost is organic materials, and you may be thinking, I've heard organic a lot, I don't really know what it is it just anything that's like good for the environment? Well, I'm going to talk about that. Organic materials are basically just anything that was once living or is carbon based. So fruits and vegetables, scraps of fruits and vegetables, leaves, tree branches, paper, even though it's not like living, it came from a tree which was once living, therefore it's organic. And any inorganic materials is things that were never living or didn't come from living things at all. So rocks, plastics are big inorganic items, anything like that, you can't really compost. So it's important to know what is organic and what isn't organic when you're trying to figure out what to compost and how to compost. And another important aspect about composting that you may not know is you can't just mix organic materials without really knowing what kind of organic materials they are first. There's a ratio you should really stick to between what is called green materials and brown materials. And it sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty easy. Green materials are any organic materials that are rich in nitrogen, and they basically help heat up the pile. And brown materials are any organic materials that are basically rich in carbon or carbohydrates. And they're stuff like paper, straw, anything that's going to bulk up the pile. And greens are things that, like crushed eggs and tea bags, are kind of like going to break down pretty fast and are going to be superfoods for the microorganisms and bacteria that are in your compost pile. And there's a lot of different ratios for how you can mix like green to brown materials. I know the EPA recommends like a 1-to-1 ratio of green and brown materials. I've seen other websites recommend like 1 part nitrogen, 3 parts carbon, so 1 part green materials and 1 part brown materials. But it's all up to you. As long as you have enough of each, your compost pile should be good. So, and this is the big thing with compost: aerobic and anaerobic digestion. Now, the thing that makes compost so good is that it breaks down organic materials aerobically. And aerobic is just a fancy word to say with oxygen. So, compost that breaks things down aerobically uses oxygen to help speed up the process and transform the materials into like exputs that contain CO2. And anaerobic digestion, which means without oxygen, which happens in like landfills or just piles that are never touched, there's no oxygen getting broken down or put into the inputs. That makes methane, which is terrible for the environment. So, aerobic digestion and composting, when you're turning it a lot and it's just getting oxygen, it makes CO2, which is so much better for the environment, rather than anaerobic digestion, which creates methane in places like landfills. And we don't like that. Why don't we like it? Because methane like is so much more powerful than CO2 when it comes to global warming. CO2, as you can see in the picture, is like 1 global warming potential, and methane is 21 global warming potential. So this gas goes into the ozone layer and basically just heats up the earth, which is really bad if you don't know. But this kind of pertains into why you should compost if you can. It helps the environment tremendously. Now, it not only reduces your carbon footprint, as we just saw, it helps the ozone layer especially, but composting also adds nutrients to barren soil. And you may think, well, that's awesome, but I'm not a gardener. I don't really need fertilizer or great soil. The fact of the matter is, the earth needs great soil. So when you add these nutrients to the soil, it helps contain more water, it prevents erosion, it prevents like diseases from spreading to plants. Overall, it's just great. It's a great thing to do because instead of going to the landfill where it's wasting its potential, it's given back to the earth where it helps the earth protect itself from natural events such as floods or droughts or things of that nature. And Ruth, I think you have a question. You're raising your hand.
Yes, I had a question. So are you saying that if it goes into landfill, it's gonna become the second one?
The
What is,
anaerobic digestion.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it like just when it goes to landfills, they're not really turning it. There's no oxygen like mixing with these big heap piles of trash. And so they're basically just decaying in a manner that's anaerobic without oxygen. And this decaying process produces methane. And the benefit to composting is that most methods of composting use aerated static methods or like aerated methods that help mix oxygen in. So oxygen is definitely incorporated into the decaying process. And when oxygen is incorporated into the food decaying process, it creates CO2 rather than methane. I hope that cleared things up. So not only is there an environmental cost to not composting, but there's also like a real financial cost to not composting. And we can see this at Washington College. From data from the fiscal year of 2017 and 2018, it's estimated that $184,000 a year was spent on disposing of food scraps from Odson Hall. Like, just imagine that. That's almost $200,000 spent transporting food scraps that people didn't eat. And if we composted it at Washington College, we wouldn't have to spend money transporting it to landfills and stuff like that. And not only this fact, but landfills themselves are terrible to live near. Let me tell you. I mean, I don't live near a landfill, but I did a project on landfills this past semester for my environmental economics class, and they lower the property values of surrounding homes. They make everything smell near the surrounding property, and it's just terrible to live near. Like, the quality of lives people live when they live near landfills are terrible. So we should try to avoid sending things to landfills and creating demand for landfills wherever possible. And we do this by diverting food scraps away from landfills and into composting facilities and composting areas where people can compost. And as we talked about, they produce methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. And so there's different methods of composting. I know a lot of you are on campus right now, but if you aren't on campus, you can learn about different methods of composting that work for you. So in this picture with the worms at the very top left is called vermicomposting. And this is where food scraps are mixed in with soil and worms are added into the process, usually like earthworms or red wigglers. Worms like that eat the food at a pretty fast rate and break down the food quicker. And they also give you what's known as like castings, which is like a soil additive that can help soil. And they also create what is known as compost tea, which is highly valued. I know a past member was vermicomposting and she had compost tea, and it was crazy because you add that to like a potted plant that was dying and it would basically resurrect itself. It's so powerfully rich in minerals and nutrients that plants need. And vermicomposting, like, there's a lot of benefits to vermicomposting. It's one of the fastest methods of composting. They estimate that 2 pounds of worms in a composting bin, if you get them 1 pound of organic materials, they can eat that in 24 hours, which is crazy, you know? And then at the top left or the top right, we have a tumbler system. This is the system I use at my house. I'm not on campus right now, but I use a tumbler system to compost my food scraps. And it's basically just another method of aeration where you put soil in and then you put your food scraps in and you tumble it. And the tumbling helps aerate the pile, make sure oxygen is included into the mixture, and that way it breaks down the items. I like the method. I think there are some pros and cons to it. I've noticed that in the winter, it doesn't really heat up very fast, but it does its job. So that's all that matters. And then at the bottom left, we have an aerated static pile composting. And this is basically where it's more suited for larger facilities, and WAC actually uses this facility to compost, where piles of compost are taken in and it's made sure it's aerated either by pumping oxygen in or turning it. It's more practical to pump oxygen in, but in other places they use bulldozers or like heavy machinery to help turn the piles. And as long as it's aerated, it's breaking down food. And it's actually pretty efficient because these piles, because of their substantive size and the amount of stuff that's in it, they get hot. The composting process actually requires a lot of heat to break down food like efficiently and quickly. And these piles are able to get up to 140 degrees for like a week long and like stay that like basically temperature for a while. So this is like a serious method of composting. One of my favorites, if I must say. And then there's also other methods of composting that aren't necessarily as aerated, but they still help break down food waste and do their job. This one method at the bottom right is called the Bokashi method, I believe. I'm not that familiar with it, but while researching, a lot of people use it when they don't have time or money to like buy tumblers or other build like composting piles themselves. They use this method, and this method basically introduces a ton of microorganisms to break down the food themselves. So it's just important to be aware of the different methods you can use to compost. If you're on campus, we use the aerated static pile, and that's how you can compost. If you're at home, I recommend either vermicomposting or investing in a tumbler, or you can DIY your own tumbler. There's a lot of like Pinterest recipes and stuff online where you can find your own tumbler. So I recommend using those methods to compost. And so how can you compost at WAC? We use the aerated style static pile method in tumblers, but mostly the static pile method. And our compost pile is located in the campus garden. If you've never been there before, there's a map on the next slide, and I'll show you exactly where you can go to get there. And we use a 3-bin system to compost. So in the first bin on the most left right, we have like fresh food scraps that we're actively collecting from the community and students. And the middle pile is mainly empty. We use that to store like wood chips to cover the pile or any other kind of materials we need to store at the moment. And at the rightmost third pile, we have our active composting, which you can see in the picture is pretty hot. We have temperature measures in there, and then the trash can is covering the aerated pump that we pump oxygen into. And this is where the decaying process happens, and it's amazing. This process helps to reduce WAC cost, the financial cost, and the environmental cost associated with not composting. And I think it's just a great process because you can see what happens to your food scraps. Like in the first bin, you drop them off, and in the last bin, they're decaying. So it's amazing. Oh, Ruth, you had a question?
Yes, I've never really understood it. I've composted at WAC, but I've never really understood the process. Are you burning the soil, or is it just absorbing the soil?
I mean, it is kind of like burning. It doesn't catch on fire, but the aerated static pile method is designed to heat it up as much as like physically possible before it spontaneously combusts. And by heating it up, basically these microorganisms, bacteria and fungi go crazy and they break down the food faster. So we're not lighting it on fire, but we're just giving these microorganisms the space and the tools to kind of break things down how they like it. So they kind of like it warm and hot. And it also, it's not like we burn it, but that's kind of the reaction we get from composting. So it's originally cold, like the temperature of any other soil. But as the food breaks down, this generates a bit of heat. And as this generation is like multiplied by however big the pile is, it can get pretty hot. So we're not like heating up the pile ourselves, we're just giving it oxygen. And this oxygen is allowing for the reaction of heat to occur, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
No problem. I enjoy your questions. Keep it coming.
Do you ever have to regulate the heat yourself, or does it like it completely just does it on its own? Like any whatever, like does it ever get too hot or something and you have to like aerate it again or something like that?
Um, it's never gotten too hot under my watch. I mean, if it got too hot, it would just spontaneously combust, and then we kind of have to call the fire department to put it out. But we do have a problem with it being too cold sometimes because you're supposed to try to get it to like 140 degrees and then make it stay that temperature for a little bit to ensure everything gets broken down.
Okay.
But as I've researched composting, a lot of people put emphasis on this heat and like how long it should be and like you should monitor it 24/7. But I think as long as the food is being broken down, everything is good. We can't really regulate the temperature because we don't have the tools at WAC to like, like stick a heater into the middle of the pile and heat it up
Right.
or like put a fan on it and cool it down. But I know some commercial systems, they actually have like a big giant, almost like a cylinder, and they put their soil and their food scraps in there and they'll like artificially heat it up or artificially cool it down to whatever they need it to be at the time. So yeah, some places do that, but at WAC we don't really do it. We're just lo-fi, simple, easy, practical, that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. And this is the map. I don't know if you guys how long you've been on campus or how familiar you are with it, but this is Hodson Hall and this is like the square. And if you go behind Hodson and take a right and then turn into the parking lot that's here besides the buildings and go by the Lorby Arts Center, here is the campus garden. And there's 2 entrances now actually, but the main entrance is like right here. And you can literally walk and turn to your left and you will see the compost bins. I hope those are clear enough directions for you guys because I'm not the best at giving directions, but there it is. I don't want anyone to get lost. I know how intimidating it can be walking around a place you've never been.
The fence is painted all cute though. I feel like it's pretty. I think they put like bees and stuff on it so you can kind of tell where everything is.
Yeah, exactly. If you see bees and painted fences, you're there. You're there. Just go through the fence. So how can you compost your food scraps or how can you collect it? Because the first step to composting is collecting your food scraps. You can't just, put food into the pile. You kind of have to collect the food scraps first. And the step to that is you have to find a reusable container. Now, I recommend like a mason jar. I've looked up a Pinterest recipe. Some people use Folger cups and drill holes in it and put a little filter in. But that's kind of fancy. You don't need to drill holes in it. Just, put your food scraps in there, twist the lid tight so nothing can get in or out, and you're basically set. And we recommend that you try not to use any plastic bags, even if they say they're biodegradable, because most of the time they're not, unfortunately. They say they're biodegradable, but under certain conditions they can biodegrade, and the conditions at WAC aren't fit for it, unfortunately. So we recommend using paper bags as liners if you don't want to get your, container dirty, or just don't use a liner at all. I'm going to show you my compost bin, which is actually like, I don't know, I got this winter, but basically you can just pull it out. It has its own little, hold on, it can get stuck pretty easily, but it has its own little jar that you can take out when it's full, and then I put it in my tumbler, but you can walk it over to the garden and compost it. And I don't have to use paper bags or biodegradable bags liner. And I like that because I just rinse it out and then it's good. So yeah. And then I recommend that you try to empty it at least once a week. You're not going to like die or anything. It's not like bad, but it's just to prevent like mold growing. Mold is fine for the compost, but I just don't want you guys like huffing in mold when you empty it. It's probably not the best for yourself. Or just whenever it's full. And then if you're worried about fruit flies or anything, there shouldn't be any. As long as your thing is on tight, there's no flies. It's not going to make a smell. It's not going to attract anything. So just find a reusable, I say airtight, but as long as it like turns tight, you're good. And then this is the segment where I tell you what things you can and what things you can't compost. And it's kind of complicated, but once you learn it, you know it. So I'm going to go over to the documents I shared with you guys. If you don't have it, I will resend it at the end of the event. But our team created, let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah, here it is. First, we'll go over what you can compost. So remember, anything that is organic, you can compost, but you may not know at first, like, oh yeah, that's organic, I didn't realize. So what can you compost? Beans, bread, coffee grounds, crackers. This is kind of controversial. Most compost books or composting guides, composting websites are going to say, don't compost dairy items and don't compost meat. And we included those items on our list because you can compost it. But the reason they tell you not to is because they're afraid it might attract pests or like animals and stuff. And we don't really have to worry about that at WAC. And it's like, we want to encourage composting as like the end goal. So just compost it. We just ask that you try to break it down and make it small quantities. Like try not to just dump like things of cheese on the pile if you can. We'd really appreciate it. Dead house plants, dryer lint, eggshells, fruits and vegetables, house trimmings, jello, muffins, napkins. Yeah, any type of soiled paper, perfect to compost. Like you may be like, oh, I can't recycle the pizza box because I know it's soiled. Compost it. Great way to not throw things in the landfill.
Like even if it's oily, a little bit oily, like a
Yeah.
cheese bread box or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, they tell you not to compost like straight oil, but a
Okay.
little bit of oil in like a cardboard is not going to kill the compost pile, so it's better just to compost it.
Okay.
Yeah, post-it notes, you may be like, oh, the sticky stuff, it's fine. I looked it up. It's good to compost. Tea bags, as long as there's no plastic or staples inside, it's good. Rice cooked and uncooked, basically anything that's organic. And if you don't know, if I didn't put it on the list, just ask someone on the composting team or just Google it. That's what I do most of the time when I'm like, can I compost this? A lot of people are going to be like, don't compost it because of, I don't know. There's like some controversial stuff about composting. Like I keep seeing, don't compost oranges or like citrus fruits and like the citrus fruit peeling because it can make your soil acidic. But I mean, at WAC, our pile is so big, you don't really have to worry about a tiny bit of acid in our pile. So it's good. Just compost it. And then what can you not compost? So anything that's inorganic, but you may be like, oh, I thought that was compostable. Animal bones are technically organic, but they just take forever to break down that we ask you not to compost it. I don't think that'll be a big of a problem because I'm sure not a lot of people have animal bones except like when they eat chicken wings or something. Don't compost animal feces or cat litter. Even though feces is like organic, it just that can create a lot of diseases in the pile, so we ask you not to do it. And cat litter can't be composted. Biodegradable bags, I already touched on, they're technically plastic. So even if they say they're biodegradable, it's they say that under certain conditions, which WAC doesn't meet, unfortunately. Try not to compost any like coated cardboard. And when we say coated cardboard, we mean anything that's like coated in like a kind of like a plastic film. Like inked cardboard, you're fine. Well, yeah. Just not magazines. Just recycle those instead. No cooking oils or grease, plastic lined paper products. The coffee cups at Java are plastic lined, so you can't really compost them. Paper plates, if they're plastic lined, you can't compost. Any plastic tape, you can't compost. They do make eco-friendly tape now that's like paper-based and water-based. You can compost that, just not regular like plastic tape. No stickers on fruits and vegetables. That's a big problem at a lot of composting facilities. Just make sure you take the sticker off before you throw it in your composting bin, please. No tinfoil, toxic materials, used menstruation products. Yeah, just please no any biohazardous material. Even though it may be composted, just we don't like to deal with biohazardous material. So yeah, can't compost anything that's inorganic. So let me continue. Anyone have any questions about that? About what you can and can't compost while we're on the topic?
What about tissues?
Tissues, I want to say you should be good. I mean, I guess it could be considered biohazardous if you're like sick, but
I feel like in this day and age at the moment, we should just say throw your tissues out,
yeah, okay.
unfortunately. Just
good
to be
point.
like super duper safe.
Yeah. We don't want a COVID composting pile. This is COVID friendly compost.
You could also try using a reusable handkerchief if you felt like it, but maybe just throw your tissues out.
I agree with that, Annalise. Thank you. So yeah, after that, if you're so inclined, if you start composting and you're like, wow, I really love this. I want to try to get WAC and the whole community to start composting. How can I do that? Well, you join the composting team. And how do you join the composting team? You email me if you like, or anyone on the officers team. You can join us on campus groups. That's the link, or you can just search up like composting team on campus groups. There's not any other composting team. You can follow us on Instagram, WAC Composting Team, and attend upcoming monthly meetings. We haven't set a date yet because the semester hasn't started yet, and I haven't had the time to send out like a form to decide a date. So that is yet to be determined. But I will send in the chat real quick a form you guys can fill out if you want to join the composting team, and you'll be added to like the mailing list and the group me and every other thing that we use. I'll send that real quick. 1 second. Oh wait, okay. I'm just direct messaging someone for some reason. Okay, that Google Doc, if you fill it out, I'll add you to the email list as soon as possible. I'll add you to the group me as soon as possible. And you can start getting involved with composting at a community level. So I recommend you do it, even if you're like, I don't know how much I want to get involved. We're pretty relaxed. We don't like force you to do anything. It's more of like a project-based club where you can volunteer for projects or not volunteer for projects, attend events or not attend events, whatever you want to do. It's more of a community kind of club than like a stress-induced, oh, you have to do this kind of club. So I encourage you, try and fill it out. If you don't like it, you can quit at any time, but try it out. Most of you are freshmen. You don't know where it can take you, you know? Okay, I will continue back to our presentation. I'm pretty sure I'm at the end. Here, I won't even share my screen again because I think we're at the question section of the presentation. Yes, before the Kahoot, stay for the Kahoot, guys. We're gonna have a crazy Kahoot where you can win one of these things. So stay for that. But before we do the Kahoot, I want to ask you guys, do you have any questions or comments or discussions you want to bring up? Now is the time.
Does green versus brown material, is there a difference between like is one better for aerobic respiration, or does that just have to do with like how you compost it? It has nothing to do with the actual material.
I don't think like one is necessarily better. You need both. But I think nitrogen is like green objects that are based in nitrogen are probably harder to find, or more, how should I say, like useful in a composting process, because that's the type of materials that are going to heat it up and aid in aerobic digestion more than like the brown objects that are basically just carbon that aren't really going to react that much. But
Okay, thanks.
no problem. Any
I
other
have a quick-
questions?
I have a quick question. So we're talking about the individual composting and so forth and so on. But what about like residential halls? Because I know we have the recycling bins and they have what you can put inside and what you can't. But could we possibly put compost bins so that we can encourage more students and it's also a little bit more accessible? Like what if students aren't able to walk all the way across campus to the campus garden due to their schedule? So I'm just thinking about accessibility reasons. Is that possible to start implementing compost bins in the trash areas, especially in like in the upperclassmen dorms?
That's a great question. At this time, we don't have any like communal or residential composting bins, but that's definitely, we can definitely add that to our goal list. Because of COVID last semester, we were kind of like not allowed to do anything on campus, but I think we should definitely look into it. Yeah, like it shouldn't be that big of a issue assigning volunteers to certain residential halls to collect compost. The only thing that I'm worried about is like the volume of compost we collect, but if we take it out like every day or every 2 days, it should be fine. So Yeah, we can definitely add that to our goal list and maybe even implement it this semester if people on campus are willing to do that. I'm not on campus, so I couldn't volunteer, but if you are, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for asking. Any other questions you guys have?
I have a question about the green pile and like the brown one you said in the beginning. So
Mhm.
when you said that they have to be mixed, like what do you mean by that?
Oh, basically, like you just have to incorporate each material into one pile. So, like if you're adding eggshells into your pile, and this is if you're like making a pile yourself, you don't really have to worry about that if you're just contributing food scraps to our compost pile, because I'm sure there's plenty of green and brown items in our compost pile. But if you're saying you're at home and you want to make your own little compost pile, if you're adding green items like eggshells, just make sure you balance that out with brown items like leaves or something like that. So there's a nice balance between the two. And that's all I mean by mixing it, you know. Did that answer your question, Ruth, or did I just confuse you more?
No, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions?
I feel like I'm gonna ask so many questions, but
You're
going back to
fine.
like community based,
Mhm.
how are you working with the Chestertown community, or like different organizations that address the marginalized populations within Chestertown or surrounding towns, like developing those relationships and doing mentorship. So like what are y'all plans to expand outside of the Washington College community?
That's also a great question. At the time, I mean, we do work a lot with the community. Shane Brill, our like mentor and head of the sustainability department, works a lot on that front. But as a club, we don't really have a lot of plans for, I mean, we want to expand, but as of right now, because we are a relatively new club, we haven't had a chance to do those type of things yet. But I do think that would be important to achieve. I know this semester, Shane, you were telling me how the Sassafras Education Center, our compost that we generate at the garden, we want to give to them to help with like making their soil, right?
Yes. So if I can jump in real quick. So the Sassafras Environmental Education Center is going to start collecting compost from the dining hall once a week. They'll be taking two 48-gallon totes, and that's just our starting point. They're going to take it over to their facility where they're going to compost it, and they're going to grow food with as part of their educational program, and to get local students actually producing the food on site at their site. And then the food they produce will, some of it will be used in educational programs with kids in local schools, and other food they produce will come back to us to use in the food lab for educational purposes on campus and in the community. So we're starting out with just those two totes once a week, but we're hoping to scale up over time and eventually get all of our dining hall food scraps composted. But as a starting point, we're gearing up the campus garden, collection facility to accommodate more food scraps from the community. So it's forthcoming.
Yeah, right now it's kind of just set up for student collection or people who know about the composting center, because not even all students know about where the garden is, unfortunately. And we're trying to raise that awareness and get more people involved in composting at WAC first. And then our goal is to move on to the community as a whole next. So I hope that answered your question, Queen. Ruth, did you have a question too?
Yes, my question was, right now I'm living at home, and
Mhm.
I just wanted some advice. I heard that online that you can. I have like a big backyard, so I heard that you can like dig a hole and like put your compost in, but I just wasn't. I wasn't sure if anyone had like any reservations about that, or like how to do that.
No, I mean, you can totally do that. That's another method. There's so many methods of composting. That's called like the direct method, where you kind of just put your food scraps under the soil and let the natural soil decompose and decay on its own. I mean, it should work. The only problem is it may not get that much air, and that's why I use a tumbler, because it's like guaranteed to get that much air. But, there's pros and cons to anything. As long as it's like being diverted away from the landfill, I think it's a good idea. If that's what you can do, that's what you can do. That's awesome. I mean, if you're looking into more things, I can definitely talk to you about like that. I've seen a lot of things on the internet where people create tiny little bins, like not our large concrete bins, but they create tiny little bins out of wood, and you can kind of do it that way. But that's probably a lot of labor intensive work that I don't know. I don't want to do it. That's why I invested in a tumbler. But I mean, that sounds great to me. Anyone else have any comments on it?
I know I was trying to get my family to compost when I was at home. And there are a whole bunch of like fancy methods of doing it, but like what Ruth was asking about, there are certain things that you can just stick in the ground, and then the worms will like come through and eat the food scraps and then go out and then leave their castings in the soil and stuff. So I think digging a hole would be fine. And even if you wanted to just like throw it in a bucket and drill some holes in the bottom and then let stuff go in and out, it would probably work too. It doesn't have to be like super fancy to compost.
Yeah, exactly. Keep it DIY. That's probably better for the environment anyway, honestly. Any other questions? If not, we can move on to Kahoot, my favorite part. Okay, I'll share the link with you guys if I figure out how to do that. This is the special Kahoot. I don't know if you saw in the email, but you had a chance to win 1 out of 3 composting pins, and this is how if you win. If you get top 3 in the Kahoot, you get to have the composting bin of your own, like a fancy one. You don't need a fancy one, but it's just for yourself. It's a nice little treat for composting. Okay, let me share my screen real quick. Oh, also, officers who saw the Kahoot already, I don't know if I should let you, like, participate since you may know the answers, but I don't know. You can participate, just try not to win. Okay, do you guys see my screen? You can enter the pin, and I'll be waiting for you. Okay, is everyone in the Kahoot? Oh wait, no, we got more people. Anyone not in the Kahoot that wants to participate? Or we got everyone? Oh, no. Okay. Anyone else not in that wants to participate? Okay, I'll be starting. I've never started a Kahoot before, so let's see how this works. Everyone good? I'm gonna start it. 3, 2, 1, start. So what makes up compost? Damn, y'all got it right. That's amazing. Yeah, so it's basically just organic materials, as I said. Next. Oh, we got Queen on the leaderboard. Nice. This is kind of a hard question. Oh, most people got it right. Yeah, it's just aerobically. And I say hot composting distinctively because it gets so hot because it has oxygen into the process so abundantly. And that's why it gets so hot. But if you didn't get it right, it's okay. Oh, we have Grace on the leaderboard now. Nice. True or false question. Coffee grounds are compostable. Nice. Coffee grounds are compostable as long as there's no like plastic materials around it. It's all good. Kitri on the leaderboard. Nice. True or false question. Double points. Ooh. Biodegradable bag plastic items are compostable. That is false. Even though they say biodegradable, it may not be compostable. Good to know. Just try to avoid plastic at all costs. Plastic is bad. Even if it says biodegradable, even if it's like, oh yeah, we're eco-friendly, just try and avoid it. Katie on the leaderboard. First place, nice. Double points. Where can you drop off your food scraps at WAC? Nice. At the campus garden. I'm glad no one got that wrong. I would have been sad. Katie still on top. Nice. Vermicomposting works with the help of what animal? I'm glad you guys got that one right too. Earthworms. You can use also other kind of worms, but I know that's like the most popular kind used for vermicomposting. As long as they eat the materials, you're good. Katie's still on top. True or false question? Compost is supposed to smell. That is false. As long as it's maintained well, there should be no smell. Katie still on top. Good job. Quiz time. Oh, multi-select questions. So you select more than one. Why is composting beneficial? Choose all that apply. Nice. It was all of them. So I'm glad you guys got that. It's not just environmentally benefits that help because of composting. There's financial benefits, there's social benefits. Composting is just a wonderful process all around. Oh, Hannah on top now. Multi-select question again. What can you use to hold your food scraps? Choose all that apply. Nice. It's all of them. Basically any container you can use as long as it is airtight and, you know, keeps things relatively fresh, it's good. Also, pro tip, if you can't really get out to the garden for a while and you need to keep your food scraps fresh, try keeping them in your fridge or the freezer if you can. I know you probably have a tiny little mini fridge in your dorm room, or if you're at home, you can use your regular fridge. But just try to keep them cold if you don't expect to be able to drop them off anytime soon. Grace on top. True or false question. Double points. Ooh. Pizza boxes are compostable. That is true. I recommend you compost pizza boxes. Oh, who won? Who won the thing? Grace, okay. You want a composting bin? Another Grace, you won the composting bin? And Michaela, you want a composting bin. Congrats, guys. Runners up. I'm sorry, we only had 3 composting bins, but you can DIY your own compost, your own composting container. It's all good. And so here, let me write down your guys' name because we haven't ordered them yet, but the SGA is in the process of ordering them, and I'm sure they'll just come through you through like the regular mailing system at WAC. So I'll write down. I guess I should ask in the chat what your full name is if you won. So let me do that. Sorry, my microphone is in the way. Stop sharing.
I have a small question.
Yeah.
So like at Trader Joe's, they have like a plastic bag, and it says that it's compostable. Can you compost that?
I mean, it depends on your composting system. The reason why we say biodegradable bags and like compostable bags, if they are plastic, aren't actually compostable is because those types of materials take a lot of heat to break down. So they're not lying when they say, oh, yeah, it's biodegradable or it's compostable. But most of the time, it requires a lot of heat, a lot of sustained heat for a long period of time. And most like at-home composters or tiny facilities that don't have a ton of money that can just regulate temperatures all the time, like WAC, they don't have the resources to decay it at the rate it's necessary. So I just recommend avoiding it. Try to use paper if possible or anything that's not plastic. As long as it's organic, it's good. Or try to get something reusable that you can just dump out and like wash yourself so you don't have to use any type of liners or bags. Did that answer your question, Ruth?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so the 3 people who won, can you type your full names in the chat so I can write them down and have the SGA send you your prizes? Por favor.
Can I just use something like this to compost, like a random, like?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, cool.
So another example, so this is ours. It literally is just like a Tupperware I got from the store. It doesn't have to be anything like fancy. It's just anything that like closes. I'd recommend something large enough that you don't have to like leave every day. My freshman year, when I found out about the composting bin, my Tupperware was like this big. So it like fit 2 eggshells and a banana. So I wouldn't recommend something that small, but.
Yeah, get something that, you know, you'll like as much as, you know, you can. If it's too big and it's like too heavy for you to carry around, I don't recommend that. If it's too tiny, like Kitri said, probably not useful. So anything that can hold anything is probably good, ideal. Okay, well, that's the end of the event. If you guys want to stay on and chat about composting, I'm fine with that. If you have any more questions or comments or suggestions, or if you didn't receive any of the files, did everyone get the PDF files, the items in your dorm you can compost and the items in your dorm you can't compost? Have you guys been able to download that yourself for your own use? We're good? Okay. And was everyone able to fill out the Google form if you wanted to join the composting team? Or click on the link so you can fill it out later if you were able to? Everyone good? Okay. Well, that concludes the event. If no one has any further questions, you guys can leave. Have a great day. I'm so happy you guys came. It was such a fun event. I hope you guys had fun. I had fun. I love talking about composting whenever I can. So I'm glad you guys let me talk about composting with you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
So today,
Thanks, Emily.
I
Thanks,
saved,
Emily.
No
I
problem.
saved
Thank you.
food scraps from like earlier, like yesterday and the day before, because I in preparation for this and to see where we can bring it. So if I just wanted to right now, I could just walk over to the garden, and it's the one on the left. I just dump it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
you got it exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Hannah. See you later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.